My name's Alex. I'm 29, and until last month, I thought I had a pretty decent relationship with my family. Sure, my parents had their favorites. My older brother Ryan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, but I always thought I was at least tolerated. I'd built a life for myself, worked a normal job, saved up to get engaged to my fiancée, Emma. We were planning a wedding, talking about kids, and I thought I finally had everything figured out. Then the will reading happened. My parents passed away suddenly earlier this year, and we were called to the attorney's office to go over their estate. Ryan strutted in wearing his custom suit, shaking hands with everyone like he was the main character in a movie. Emma squeezed my hand, whispering that everything was going to be okay, that we'd figure things out together no matter what. I had no idea how wrong she was. The lawyer cleared his throat, read the formalities, then got to the part that made my stomach drop. Ryan inherited my parents' $1.5 million penthouse in New York City, their investment portfolio, and my father's entire collection of rare vintage cars. I, on the other hand, was left with the family cabin, an old, falling-apart structure in the woods that hadn't been used in nearly 2 decades. No money, no savings, no car, just a creaking cabin that I hadn't seen since I was 12. Ryan smirked when he heard it, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Makes sense," he said casually. "I'll actually put what they gave me to good use." Alex doesn't even like the city. I sat there frozen, humiliated, my ears ringing. Emma gave me this look, a mix of pity and something else I couldn't quite place. The attorney pushed a few papers toward me to sign, and I did it mechanically, just wanting to get out of there. Later that night, Emma confronted me. She was pacing around our tiny apartment, clearly agitated. "Alex, this is embarrassing," she said, almost spitting the words. "You can't seriously think we're going to live in some rotting shack in the woods." I tried to calm her down, told her I'd figure something out, maybe sell the cabin and use the money as a down payment somewhere else. But she just shook her head, crossing her arms. "You'll never be a real man if you can't provide," she said coldly. That one hit me like a punch to the gut. The next morning, I woke up to an empty apartment and a short note on the counter. Emma had moved out. By the end of the week, I found out through social media that she had moved in with Ryan, my own brother, and was happily sipping champagne on the balcony of what used to be my parents' penthouse. I didn't yell. I didn't call anyone. I just grabbed my keys, packed a few bags, and drove out to the cabin. The place was even worse than I remembered. Broken windows, moss growing on the roof, the front porch sagging under its own weight. But something about standing there, looking at what was supposed to be my inheritance, flipped a switch inside me. I decided right then I wasn't going to beg for scraps. The first night, I barely slept. The forest was quiet, the air heavy, my thoughts running wild. I kept replaying Ryan's smug face, Emma's words, the lawyer's indifferent tone. I felt small, angry, humiliated. But the next morning, while clearing out the old pantry, I found something. And that's when everything changed. I woke up to the sound of creaking wood and birdsong, the kind of silence that's almost too quiet, like the whole forest is holding its breath. My back ached from sleeping on the old couch, but I dragged myself up, determined to at least make the place livable. The cabin smelled of dust and mildew. The kitchen was a graveyard of rusted cans and warped wood, and the floorboards groaned like they might collapse under my weight. I started cleaning, partly because it needed to be done, partly because I needed to keep my mind from replaying Emma's words on a loop. "You'll never be a real man." I could still see her face when she said it, detached, disappointed, like I was some project she had wasted time on. Every sweep of the broom felt like I was pushing that memory further away. That's when I found the trunk. It was wedged under the kitchen counter, covered in dust and cobwebs, and locked with a heavy, rusted clasp. At first, I thought it was just an old toolbox, but when I dragged it out, I saw that it was carved with my grandfather's initials. My grandfather had built this cabin himself back in the 1960s, and I remembered him as this gruff, quiet man who never really spoke much at family gatherings. I tried to pry the lock open, but it wouldn't budge. It felt heavier than it had any right to be, and just moving it to the corner of the room left me sweating. I decided I'd deal with it later. I had enough problems to handle right now. That night, my phone buzzed. It was a family group chat message from Ryan, the first in months. He'd sent a photo of himself and Emma in front of the penthouse window, champagne flutes raised, city skyline glowing behind them. The caption read, Finally living the life Mom and Dad wanted for us. Cheers. The message stung more than I wanted to admit. I stared at the picture for a long time, the champagne glass in Emma's hand catching the light, her smile so bright and fake it almost blinded me. I didn't reply. Over the next week, the messages kept coming. Photos of Ryan's business dinners with influencers and investors. Videos of the parties he was throwing at the Penthouse. Emma posing with some of Mom's jewelry that I hadn't even realized was gone until then. It was like they were deliberately shoving their happiness in my face, reminding me of what I'd lost, or maybe what they thought I never deserved. Then came the phone call. "Alex, buddy." Ryan's voice was loud, too cheerful. "Listen, I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not falling apart or anything." "I'm fine," I said flatly, staring out the window at the tree line. "Good, good," he said, chuckling. "You should come visit sometime. The place looks incredible now that Emma's here. We redecorated. You wouldn't even recognize it. Oh, and thanks again for not making things messy at the will reading. I know it must have been hard for you, but hey, Mom and Dad knew what they were doing. They always said I had the drive to take care of the family's future." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. "Sure, Ryan. Glad you're enjoying yourself." He paused, then added in a softer voice, Alex, maybe this is for the best. I mean, you're not exactly cut out for city life. That cabin suits you. Quiet, simple, no pressure. You can just be. And, hey, if you ever decide you don't want it, I can find a buyer for you. Probably won't get much, but at least it'll put some cash in your pocket." I hung up before he could say another word. After that call, something shifted in me. The humiliation started to burn less and calcify more, turning into something heavier, something sharper. I spent my days tearing out rotten planks, fixing what I could, salvaging tools from the shed out back. Each nail I hammered felt like a way to reclaim control, to build something of my own, no matter how small. One evening, while rummaging through the attic for insulation, I found a faded envelope tucked under a loose floorboard. Inside were a handful of old black and white photographs. My grandfather standing in front of the cabin with a group of men I didn't recognize, all of them in suits, shaking hands. In the background, there was a massive piece of machinery, half covered with a tarp, and behind that, stacks of something that looked like crates. On the back of one of the photos, in my grandfather's precise handwriting, were the words, "November 1964. The first shipment is secured. Never let the land go." I sat on the attic floor for a long time, staring at those words. The first shipment of what? What was so important that he wrote a warning to keep the land? The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to the local town hall and asked about the property records. The clerk dug through some old files and confirmed that the land around the cabin had never been sold, divided, or developed. In fact, there was a note in the file indicating that there had been a permit request denied in the 1970s for mineral exploration. That night, I sat in the cabin, staring at the locked trunk again. My hands itched to know what was inside. I didn't have the tools to break it open, but I made a mental note to get a crowbar the next time I went into town. Before I could leave for supplies the next morning, another message came through from Ryan. This time it wasn't a picture, it was a video call. Against my better judgment, I answered. The screen lit up with Ryan and Emma lounging on the penthouse balcony. Ryan had his arm around her, grinning like he'd just won a prize. "Alex, there you are," Ryan said. "Listen, we've been talking. We think it would be great for you to sign over the cabin to us. I mean, let's be real. You don't have the money to keep that place up. It's going to fall apart eventually, and when it does, it's just going to cost you more than it's worth. We could renovate it, maybe turn it into a vacation rental. You'd still get to visit if you wanted to, and we'd cut you in on a small percentage of the profits." Emma nodded like it was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "It just makes sense, Alex. You don't even like being out there, do you?" I stared at them for a long moment, my jaw tight. "No," I said finally. "I'm keeping it." Ryan's smile faltered. "Come on, man. Don't be stubborn. This is what's best for everyone." I said no. I repeated and hung up. I expected anger, but instead what I felt was a strange calm, like I had drawn a line in the sand for the first time in years. That night, as the wind howled outside and the cabin creaked around me, I took the crowbar I'd bought and jammed it under the trunk's rusted clasp. With one good heave, the lock snapped. Inside was something that would change everything, but not in the way I expected. When the lock broke with a loud metallic crack, dust flew into the air and caught the light streaming through the cracked window. My heart was pounding like I had just committed a crime. I slowly lifted the lid, half expecting to find nothing but old blankets or broken tools. Instead, what I saw made me sit back on my heels, stunned. The trunk was packed with documents, maps, and what looked like several sealed metal tubes, each stamped with my grandfather's initials and a date. The papers on top were brittle but legible: geological surveys, hand-drawn diagrams, and letters written between my grandfather and a man whose name I didn't recognize, but whose letterhead listed him as a director at some mineral company I'd never heard of. I spread the papers out across the kitchen table. The more I read, the faster my pulse raced. My grandfather had discovered something on this land, something big. The surveys showed high concentrations of rare earth minerals, the kind used in technology manufacturing. There were notes about keeping the land quiet until the market matures, and even a signed agreement with a clause that mentioned a future buyout option. I sat there for hours, piecing it together. If these documents were still valid, and I had no reason to think they weren't, this land was worth far more than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just sitting on some dilapidated cabin. I was sitting on a fortune. For the first time since the will reading, I felt a flicker of hope. Not just hope, power. But before I could even decide what to do with this discovery, Ryan made his next move. 3 days later, I came back from a supply run in town to find a sleek black SUV parked outside the cabin. Ryan was leaning against the hood, wearing his usual smug grin. Emma sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone like she couldn't be bothered to look up. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Ryan spread his arms like we were old friends. "Relax, little brother. I just came to talk. In person. You know, like family." I didn't invite him inside, but he walked in anyway, looking around like he owned the place. "Wow," he said, wrinkling his nose. "This place is even worse than I imagined. You're actually staying here?" No wonder Emma left. This is depressing. Emma snickered softly without looking up from her phone. I gritted my teeth. "Get to the point, Ryan." He turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm making you one last offer. I've got a buyer lined up who's willing to take this dump off your hands for more than it's worth. You sign the papers, you get a nice chunk of change, and you don't have to waste the rest of your life rotting out here." I crossed my arms. "No." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Alex, you're being ridiculous. You're sitting on a liability. This place is a money pit. And let's be honest, you've never been great with money. You're going to lose it all eventually anyway." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I said no. "And if you ever show up here uninvited again, we're done. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up. I don't care if you think Mom and Dad would have wanted this. I'm done being treated like the family disappointment." For a moment, I thought he might back down. Instead, he smirked, shrugged, and walked out. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of crunching gravel outside. I peeked through the window and saw headlights. Before I could react, I heard footsteps on the porch and then the unmistakable sound of the front door being tried. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by the couch and swung the door open, heart hammering. The beam of light caught 2 figures, Ryan and one of his friends from the city. Ryan threw up his hands. "Whoa, relax. I was just checking on the place. You didn't answer my calls." "It's 2 in the morning," I said, my voice shaking. "Get off my property." But Ryan didn't leave. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice so his friend wouldn't hear. "You're going to regret this, Alex. You think you can play tough guy, but you're not. I'm going to make sure you have no choice but to sell this place." He left after that, but I barely slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, I found the trunk overturned, papers scattered across the floor. I had locked it before going to bed. Someone had been inside while I slept. Panic rose in my chest as I frantically gathered everything back up. The documents were still there, but some of the maps were missing, the ones that showed exactly where the mineral deposits were located. I felt sick. Ryan must have seen them. He knew what the land was worth now. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the county inspector telling me there had been a complaint filed about the cabin being unsafe and a potential hazard. If it failed inspection, I'd be legally required to vacate until repairs were made. Repairs I couldn't possibly afford on my own. I didn't have to guess who had filed the complaint. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the trunk, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was war. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't planning to roll over and let Ryan win. The inspector showed up 2 days later. He was a tall, tired-looking man with a clipboard, boots still muddy from the last property he had been to. He walked through the cabin with the kind of detached professionalism that made me nervous, scribbling notes and shaking his head every so often. When he finished, he stood on the porch with me and let out a long sigh. "Look, son," he said, almost kindly. "This place is barely holding together. You've got structural damage in the porch beams, mold in the kitchen, and the roof's about 5 years past due for replacement. You don't have to vacate yet, but if you don't get this place up to code soon, I'll have to mark it condemned. You understand?" I nodded stiffly, trying to keep my voice even. "How soon is soon?" He looked at his clipboard. 90 days. Maybe less if there's another complaint. 90 days. 3 months to fix a cabin that was falling apart, with money I didn't have and no one willing to help me. When he left, I sat down on the porch steps and put my head in my hands. The forest felt too quiet, like it was listening. All at once, the anger and humiliation that had been building for weeks came crashing down. My parents' favoritism, Ryan's smugness, Emma's betrayal. It all felt like it was closing in on me. I stayed like that for hours, until the sun sank below the trees and the cabin was just a dark silhouette behind me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I wondered if maybe Ryan was right. Maybe I should just sell it all, take whatever money I could get, and disappear. But then I thought of my grandfather's notes, his warning, never let the land go. That night, I had a dream about him. I was a kid again, sitting on the cabin porch while he whittled a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. He didn't say anything. He never was a talkative man. But in the dream, he handed me the bird and nodded toward the trees, like he was telling me to look deeper, to pay attention. When I woke up, the feeling didn't go away. I spent the next week in a fog, but it wasn't the kind of fog that paralyzed me. It was the kind that hides you while you think. I made lists of everything that needed fixing: new roof panels, replacing porch beams, clearing out mold. I started selling anything I didn't absolutely need, tools I could live without, the old furniture that was beyond saving. The money I got wasn't much, but it was enough for materials. I worked from dawn until late at night, hammering, sawing, hauling debris to the edge of the property. My hands blistered, my back ached, and sometimes I would just sit down in the dirt and stare at the ground, wondering why I was doing all this for a cabin that my own family clearly thought was worthless. And then another blow came. One afternoon, as I was replacing a section of the porch railing, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver handed me an envelope and drove away without a word. Inside was a letter from Ryan's attorney, a formal notice of intent to sue me for withholding family property of significant value. He claimed that the land contained mineral deposits that rightfully belonged to the family as a whole, and that I was refusing to act in good faith by not selling. I laughed out loud when I read it, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before a breakdown. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about helping me or keeping the cabin safe. This was about taking what I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the table with the trunk open, spreading out the documents again, this time looking for something, anything, that could protect me legally. Most of the letters were about the land surveys and mineral rights, but then I found something I hadn't noticed before, a notarized letter from my grandfather, dated the year he died. It said, in clear language, that the land was to remain in my family line, but under no circumstances was it to be sold outside of it. There was even a clause stating that whoever inherited it would have sole discretion over its use. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because it meant Ryan didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Dread because I knew that wasn't going to stop him from trying to make my life miserable until I gave in. The next morning, I drove into town and met with the only attorney I could afford. He was an older man, semi-retired, with an office that smelled like old books. He read through the letter and nodded. "You're in the clear," he said. "Legally, you own this land outright. If your brother tries to sue you, it won't go anywhere." I should have felt better, but I didn't. Because Ryan didn't fight fair. 2 days later, I came back from hauling lumber to find the front door kicked open and the cabin ransacked. The trunk was still there, but its contents were gone. Every map, every letter, every scrap of proof that my grandfather had ever written anything about the land. I called the sheriff, but he shrugged. No sign of forced entry except the door. No fingerprints. Unless you have proof of who did it, there's not much we can do. I knew it was Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. That night, sitting in the empty cabin, I felt something break inside me. Not the kind of break that leaves you shattered, the kind that leaves you cold and quiet, like a piece of metal that's been tempered in fire. I wasn't going to fight him the way he wanted me to. I wasn't going to beg or plead or sell. If Ryan wanted a war, I'd give him one. But on my terms. For the next few weeks, I stopped answering his calls. I let him think he'd won. I focused on repairing the cabin, on keeping my head down, on quietly gathering whatever I could to replace what was stolen. I went back to town hall and requested copies of the property records, then drove to the county archive to see if they had duplicates of the old surveys. Slowly, a plan began to form. One that would not just protect the cabin, but make sure Ryan and Emma could never touch this land, or me, again. And when the first letter from Ryan's lawyer arrived, threatening further legal action, I didn't panic this time. I smiled, because now I knew exactly what I was going to do. The weeks that followed were the first time in months I felt something close to control again. Every morning, I woke up with purpose. My hands were still calloused and sore, but now they moved with a steady rhythm instead of desperation. I replaced the broken porch beams one by one until the structure stopped groaning when I stepped outside. I patched the roof with new panels I bought using the last of my savings, sealing out the cold drafts that had been creeping through every night. The cabin began to feel less like a crumbling inheritance and more like something I was actively shaping, mine, in every sense of the word. It still wasn't pretty, but every nail, every plank of wood, every patch of mold I scrubbed away felt like taking back a piece of my dignity. I also threw myself into the paperwork, almost obsessively. The day after the break-in, I had gone to the county clerk's office and explained what had happened. To my surprise, they were sympathetic. Apparently, I wasn't the first person in this county to deal with a sibling who thought they were entitled to land. The clerk helped me locate duplicates of several key documents, including the mineral surveys and my grandfather's notarized letter. They even suggested I file to have the land officially recertified under my name with a fresh deed, a process that would make any future challenges from Ryan more complicated. I spent hours poring over those documents, scanning them, uploading them to secure cloud storage, and even mailing certified copies to myself so there would be a time-stamped record. If Ryan wanted to play games, I was making sure I had backup pieces for every move. During this time, I also started digging deeper, figuratively and literally. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the shed, I found the remnants of an old wooden marker buried halfway in the ground. When I dug around it, I uncovered a second marker, then a third, forming a rough triangle. The area inside the markers was just flat earth, but something about it felt deliberate, like my grandfather had marked it for a reason. I borrowed a metal detector from a guy in town and spent 3 evenings sweeping the marked area. On the third night, I got a strong hit near the center and started digging. About 3 feet down, I hit something solid, a metal box. Inside was a set of vials, each labeled with dates and numbers, along with a letter from my grandfather. The letter was short, but it confirmed everything. These vials were samples of the rare earth minerals, proof of their purity and potential value. There was even a note about contacting a particular company only when the time is right. I sat there in the dirt, holding those vials in my hands, and felt something like electricity run through me. This wasn't just an inheritance anymore. This was leverage. The next day, I called the company listed in the letter. It took some digging to get through the layers of receptionists and middle managers, but eventually I spoke with a senior representative who nearly fell silent when I mentioned my grandfather's name. Apparently, he had been a respected prospector in his day, and they still had records of his work. Within a week, a geologist from the company drove out to the cabin to take a look. He spent a full day surveying the property, and by the time he left, he looked almost giddy. "You're sitting on a gold mine," he told me, though gold wasn't even the right word. "These deposits are in high demand right now. If you play your cards right, you could make a fortune." He gave me a ballpark figure, and I nearly choked when I heard it. Hundreds of millions. More than I could have ever dreamed of having. I didn't sign anything right away. I wasn't about to rush into a deal just because I was desperate. But now I knew I had options. Real ones. Meanwhile, Ryan kept trying to get under my skin. I ignored his calls, his texts, his lawyer's letters. I let him think I was hiding away, beaten and broke. Little did he know, every day that passed I was getting stronger, physically, financially, emotionally. The cabin became more than just a shelter. It became a base. I cleared out the spare room and turned it into an office, with a second-hand desk and a computer I bought using the small loan I got approved for from the local credit union. I hired a surveyor to draw up official maps of the land and its resources, this time with my name clearly stamped on every page. Word started to spread in town. People who had once looked at me with pity, the younger brother who got the short end of the stick, now stopped by to ask about the renovations, to see what I was building. A few even offered to help with the repairs in exchange for a home-cooked meal or a favor down the road. Slowly, I felt a community forming around me, something I hadn't had in years. One evening, while standing on the porch watching the sun set through the pines, I got a message from Ryan. This time it wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a photo of Emma standing in the penthouse kitchen, holding what looked like one of Mom's necklaces. The caption said, "She looks good in what was meant to be yours." For a moment, the old anger flared hot in my chest, but then it burned out just as quickly. I didn't reply, because I had something Ryan didn't know about, something bigger than a penthouse, bigger than jewelry, bigger than whatever games he was trying to play. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The next morning, I got a call from the mineral company's legal department. They were interested in negotiating a deal, one that would involve not just buying the mineral rights, but potentially giving me a percentage of the profits from future extraction. I told them I'd think about it, but inside, I was already planning. I wasn't just going to sell and disappear. No, I was going to make sure Ryan and Emma saw exactly what they had thrown away. The call from the mineral company replayed in my head for days. It was tempting to accept their first offer. It would have been more money than I had ever seen in my life, but I knew better than to rush. Ryan had taught me something, though he'd never realize it. Power isn't just about what you have, it's about timing. If I was going to make my move, it had to be when I was at my strongest and when he least expected it. So I got to work. First, I hired a better attorney. The old man I'd met earlier had been helpful, but I needed someone who could play hardball if Ryan tried to drag this into court. I found a young, sharp real estate lawyer from the city who specialized in land disputes. Her name was Claire, and after one look at my grandfather's documents and the new surveys, she grinned like a chess player seeing checkmate 10 moves ahead. "Your brother doesn't have a case," she said flatly. "But that doesn't mean he won't try to create problems for you. What you need is to make this airtight. No cracks, no loopholes, no room for him to argue anything. We'll register the mineral rights under your name, get everything notarized, and put a legal shield around the land so strong he'd need an act of Congress to break it." For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to Ryan's games. I was building something he couldn't touch. At the same time, I started playing a longer game. I reached back out to the mineral company, not to accept their offer, but to negotiate. This time, I asked for things I never would have dared a month ago. Not just a buyout, but equity in their project, royalties tied to production, and a clause requiring them to keep my name as the legal owner of the land. To my surprise, they didn't shut me down. In fact, they seemed impressed. "You know what you have here," the representative told me over the phone. "Most people would just take the lump sum and run." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Let's just say I've learned not to let other people decide my worth." While those negotiations were in motion, I also invested in myself. I took a few online business courses, learning about land management, mineral rights, and contract law. Every evening, I sat in the cabin's office with a notebook, scribbling down strategies, planning every step. And slowly, almost without realizing it, my life started to shift. The cabin was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a fortress. The repairs were almost done, the property was secure, and I had even installed a new locking system and cameras to make sure Ryan couldn't sneak in again. One afternoon, while I was stacking firewood, a black SUV rolled up the drive. For a moment, my stomach dropped. I thought Ryan had shown up again, but when the door opened, it wasn't him. A woman in a navy suit stepped out and introduced herself as a representative of the mineral company's executive board. She had come personally to present their new proposal, a revised contract, with a figure that made me feel dizzy when I saw it. Not just a payout, a partnership. "If you sign this," she said, You won't just be wealthy. You'll be on the board of directors for our regional development project. This is long-term generational wealth we're talking about." I asked for a few days to review it, though my heart was already beating with anticipation. This was more than I had ever dreamed possible. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the stars. For months, I had been humiliated, pushed down, treated like I didn't matter. And now I had a decision to make. I could quietly take the deal, disappear into a new life, and let Ryan think he had beaten me. Or I could do what every part of me now wanted to do. Let him see just how wrong he had been, and make sure he understood exactly what he had thrown away when he chose to betray me. The choice became clear the next morning when I got an email from Ryan's lawyer threatening to file a motion to freeze the property, pending division of assets. Claire laughed when I showed it to her. "They don't even have standing to do that," she said, shaking her head. "But if you want, we can file a counterclaim, one that makes them pay for harassing you." I felt something click into place then, like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was putting together. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could take it. I started keeping a careful record of every threat, every message, every call from Ryan and Emma. I had screenshots, printed copies, even saved voicemails. Claire helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, one that spelled out exactly what would happen if they continued: financial penalties, legal fees, and a possible harassment case. And then I did something I knew would get under Ryan's skin more than anything. I invited him to the cabin. Not to negotiate, not to argue, just to catch up. I told him I had something to show him, something important. When he arrived, he was wearing that same smug grin, but I could tell he was curious. I led him inside, past the repaired porch, the fresh paint, the now pristine kitchen, and into the office where the new surveys and contracts were spread across the desk. "This is what you've been trying to steal from me," I said quietly, sliding the documents toward him. "And this is what you'll never have." For the first time, I saw something flicker across Ryan's face. Not anger, not smugness, but fear. He didn't say much when he left, but I knew this wasn't over. And that was fine, because now I was ready for whatever came next. Ryan didn't come back right away, and that was exactly what I wanted. The silence gave me room to move, to set things up just the way I needed. Over the next few weeks, I finalized everything with the mineral company. Claire reviewed every line of the contract, tearing through it like a hawk until there wasn't a single loophole left. By the time I signed it, I had secured not just a massive upfront payment, but a percentage of future profits that would keep money flowing for decades. The wire transfer hit my account 3 days later. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just financially stable, I was untouchable. I sat in the cabin's small kitchen, staring at the numbers on my laptop screen, and let out a long, slow breath. This was more than winning. This was freedom. But I wasn't done yet. I waited until the deal was fully public, until the mineral company announced their new extraction project and the county posted the notices in the paper. The town was buzzing with the news. People stopped me in the street to congratulate me. I could almost feel Ryan's world closing in as he realized what had happened without him. And then, I made my move. The first thing I did was send Ryan and Emma a certified letter through my attorney. The letter laid everything out: the sale of the mineral rights, the amount of money involved, and a very clear statement that they had no claim to a single cent. It included copies of my grandfather's notarized letter, the property deed, and a legal notice informing them that any further attempts to harass me or interfere with the property would result in a civil suit for damages. But I didn't just want legal victory. I wanted them to see what they had lost in person. So I planned a gathering. Not a party exactly, but a sort of unveiling. I invited neighbors, a few local officials, even the mineral company's representative. And yes, I invited Ryan and Emma too. I knew their pride wouldn't let them stay away. The day of the gathering, the cabin looked better than it had in decades. The porch was solid, the windows replaced, the kitchen gleamed with fresh paint. I had even hung some of my grandfather's old tools on the walls, turning them into a display, a reminder of where all this started. When Ryan and Emma arrived, they stepped out of their car dressed like they were going to a charity gala. Ryan wore a suit, Emma a designer coat. I could see the way they looked around, taking in the repairs, the freshly cleared yard, the stack of firewood I had cut and stacked by hand. "Wow," Ryan said, forcing a smile. "You've really fixed the place up." "Thanks." I said calmly, as if we were just neighbors making small talk. Come on in. There's something I want you to see. Inside, I had laid out the contracts on the table, the official ones, stamped and signed, with all the numbers in plain view. The mineral company rep stood next to me, smiling politely as Ryan and Emma approached. What is all this? Ryan asked, his voice tight. This, I said, gesturing to the documents, is what you've been trying to get your hands on. The land's mineral rights were sold last week. The upfront payment cleared my account 3 days ago. And these, I tapped the pages showing the royalty agreement, mean that every single year from now on, I'll make more than you and Emma could spend in 10 lifetimes. Emma's face went pale. Ryan's jaw clenched. And just so we're clear, I continued, my voice steady. You have no claim to any of it. Legally, financially, morally, this is mine. You tried to break into my home. You tried to take what was left of our family's legacy. You even sent inspectors to shut me down. And for what? So you could sell it for a fraction of what it was worth and buy yourself another car. Ryan opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Save it. You don't get to spin this. Not anymore. Claire, who was standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward and handed Ryan an envelope. This is your formal notice. Any further harassment will result in immediate legal action, including claims for damages and emotional distress. For a moment, the room was dead silent except for the crackle of the fire in the wood stove. Ryan looked like he wanted to explode, but he didn't. Instead, he grabbed the envelope and stormed out, Emma following behind him without a word. The rest of the gathering went on as planned. The neighbors congratulated me. The company rep shook my hand. And when everyone finally left, I stood alone on the porch watching the taillights of Ryan's car disappear down the dirt road. It should have felt like victory, but it was more than that. It felt like closure. The next day, I saw the first ripple of what I'd done. Ryan posted nothing on social media. No champagne photos, no smug captions. Friends who used to fawn over his lifestyle started reaching out to me instead, curious about the project, asking if there would be jobs available when development began. It was subtle at first, but I could see it happening, the balance of power shifting. For years, Ryan had been the golden child, the center of the family's attention. Now, he was just a man who had thrown away his last chance to be part of something bigger than himself. And I wasn't finished yet, because there was one more thing I wanted them to see, something that would make sure they never forgot the choice they made. 2 weeks after the gathering, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The mineral company's public relations team was hosting a press event to formally announce the start of their project, and they wanted me there as the official landowner and partner. I almost said no at first. Part of me just wanted to stay in the cabin, enjoy my peace, and let the world forget about Ryan and Emma. But then I thought about the years of being ignored, dismissed, told I was less than. I thought about the will reading, about Ryan smirking in his expensive suit while I signed papers like an afterthought. And I thought about Emma's voice in our apartment, cold and sharp, telling me I'd never be a real man. So I said yes. The day of the event was bright and crisp. The company had set up a stage on the edge of the property, near the marked area where the first drilling would begin. Reporters from the local paper were there, along with several county officials and even a few curious neighbors. And just as I suspected, Ryan and Emma showed up, dressed to impress, as if they could somehow spin this to their advantage. When I stepped up to the podium, there was a ripple of camera shutters. I wasn't used to speaking in front of a crowd, but I felt strangely calm. I want to thank everyone for being here. I began, my voice carrying over the microphone. This land has been in my family for generations. My grandfather built the cabin behind me with his own 2 hands, and he left it to me with one clear instruction: never let the land go. For a while, I didn't understand what that meant. I thought it was just a burden, just a broken-down reminder of everything I didn't get. But I see now he knew what was here. He knew what it would mean one day, not just for me, but for this entire community. I gestured toward the company representatives. This project is going to bring jobs, growth, and opportunities that will last for decades. And I'm proud to say I'll be here for every step of it, making sure it's done right. There was applause, polite at first, then louder, with a few cheers from the neighbors who had watched me fight to rebuild the cabin. I glanced toward Ryan and Emma. Their faces were unreadable, but Emma's eyes darted away when she caught me looking. After the event, reporters asked for photos, and I agreed. They took shots of me shaking hands with the executives, standing by the survey flags, even in front of the cabin. By the next morning, my face was on the front page of the local paper under the headline, "Local Man Partners in $600 million Deal Revitalizes Historic Property." That headline spread faster than I expected. Within days, people from outside the county were reaching out, investors, journalists, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. For once, I was the one being celebrated. And that's when the fallout started. Ryan called me late one night. His voice was tight, brittle, like something inside him was cracking. "You humiliated me," he said flatly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "No," I said calmly. "You humiliated yourself. You had every chance to be part of this, Ryan. All you had to do was treat me like family. Instead, you tried to take what wasn't yours. You sent inspectors, lawyers, even broke into my home. And you think I humiliated you." There was silence on the other end, just his breathing. "Stay away from me," I said finally. "Stay away from this land. Stay away from my life. You made your choice." I hung up before he could answer. 2 days later, I got a message from a mutual friend in the city. Apparently, word of Ryan's failed lawsuit and his attempt to sabotage me had started to spread. Some of his business partners had pulled out of deals, and one of his clients had dropped him entirely, citing concerns about his judgment. Emma, meanwhile, quietly moved out of the penthouse. I only knew because she posted a cryptic message online about starting fresh. She didn't contact me, and I didn't contact her. Whatever they had, it clearly hadn't survived the pressure. The last time I saw Ryan was 3 weeks later. I was driving back from a meeting with the mineral company when I spotted him standing by the cabin's gate, leaning against his car. For a moment, I considered driving past, but something in me wanted to end this face-to-face. I parked and got out, walking toward him. He looked smaller somehow. The suit was gone. His hair was messy. He didn't have that smug grin anymore. "You win," he said simply. "This was never about winning," I replied. "It was about keeping what was mine. You turned it into a war, Ryan. I just refused to lose." He nodded slowly, then got back in his car and drove away. I watched the dust trail fade behind him, and for the first time in months, I felt completely still inside. That night, I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars come out over the pines. The air was cool, the woods quiet except for the soft hum of crickets. In the distance, I could see the marker flags where the first phase of work would begin. I thought about my parents, about Ryan, about Emma, about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. And then I smiled. Because this cabin, this land, this life I had built out of the ashes, it wasn't just mine. It was a monument. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting or tearing someone else down. It's standing tall, unshaken, and letting them see exactly what they threw away. I leaned back in the porch chair, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and whispered to the trees, almost like I was speaking to my grandfather. I kept the land, and for the first time, it felt like the forest whispered back.